But so, these are three men who are very experienced with not just psychedelics, but associated technologies and methodologies. So Lance, I'm gonna let you lead these gentlemen and talk about some of those healing therapies.
All right, well, thank you. So I'd like to dovetail into what Brian was sharing, is that something that we believe, and those that we work with believe, that there is no external fix, there is no silver bullet, there is no magic pill. With Monsanto and the community that we've created, we believe there are three true human medicines in the world, and that is safety, love, and community. We can use psychedelics and entheogens as catalysts to get into the place where we can truly receive those human medicines, but ultimately that interconnectivity, that's the part that's missing. And to tie in with some of what Tim shared earlier, and he touched on it, we've got a system built that's exploring the physical, physiological, exploring the mental, emotional, psychological, but there's really not a lot of integration of the spiritual, whatever that might look like. It seems like there's a very bright delineation between spiritual practices and mental, emotional, or physical, physiological practices. And that it didn't used to be that way. And so really reweaving these things back together to create true, holistic, sustained care. Why do we go to church? We're looking for a community. We're looking for a connection that is greater than ourselves. Whatever that spiritual practice might look like for you. And so when we talk about moral injury and the soul wound, we've got lots of technologies. We've got beautiful BrainsWay equipment. We've got we've got things. We've got ECT. We've got these technologies, and some of which we'll talk about today, that are helping with the physical, physiological. We've got beautiful, we've got EMDR. We've got CBT. We've got philosophers and theorists, that go back to Socrates and Plato, all the way through to Joseph Campbell. And we've got Freud, and we've got Maslow, and we've got Skinner, and we've got we've got Jung, we've got Adler, who's not talked about a whole bunch because Adler tends to lead people on a recovery path instead of staying in a circular path that so much of the industry is built on. So if we can just step back, and that's why I talked earlier today about ambivalent objective curiosity, and just being able to say, okay, I've been stuck in a framework and a paradigm, and it's not working. If it were working, we wouldn't have 44 a day that were making the ultimate decision. So really creating these panels to talk about alternative ways to approach things. I can tell you, Tim, I'd studied Campbell some in my work, but it wasn't until Tim and I started speaking about a pre-integration program that he had developed, utilizing Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey as a pre-medicine experience, pre-integration framework, and it just clicked, and it made so much sense. And then, well, what if we lay that over the 12-step program that Bill Wilson developed? That was actually a 13-step program. Psychedelic Journey was the 13th step way back in the day. But then that got clipped off because of politics and a lot of things, and then instead of it being a ramp towards growth and expansiveness, it became a hamster wheel. Not discounting the value of creating structure around things that are fractured, but there comes a point when maybe that structure can be questioned, and can we, just like if we break a leg, can we take off the cast? Can we put on a boot? And then eventually can we put on a wrap? And then can we work to the point of full healing? So there are times when rigid structure has its place, but that may not be a permanent fixture. So to explore other ways of doing things, that this beautiful buffet of alternative wellness is something that I'm hoping we can discuss. So speaking of buffet offerings, I'd like to turn it to you, Michael, to share a little bit about some of the technologies that you're you're utilizing at the Denver Zen Den, and how do those interface with the larger framework of what we're talking about today?
Whew, that's a big, interesting kind of question. So, we coined the term sober psychedelic, and there was a reason that we did that. Obviously, in Colorado, that's a meaningful term. We're doing stuff that, you know, we have people that come in and say, oh my God, I need to tell everybody about this. And I'm always like, well, what are you going to tell them? They're like, I don't know, but they need to do this. And so at least we started to figure out what is actually going on here. And I think the narrative of Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, is really what's going on here. People post-pandemic are really feeling the isolation, going back to the community. They're feeling like I'm not able to be resilient in ways that I think I should be. I think that there's ways that technology can actually create a safe place for somebody to start to explore these things. And so that's one of the things that I think our clinic does. And then we also have a business in a box that people can then integrate into their own wellness practices, whether they're a coach, whether they have a wellness center, or they're just a parent that just knows that they're going to be a better parent because they're doing somatic hygiene on a regular basis so that they can be more empathetic, that they can actually really be attuned to what's needed in the moment. And of course, it's also really meaningful for people that are on the fence about psychedelics. What is that like? I have all these Nancy Reagan stories of, you know, dare, don't do drugs, and they're sitting on the sideline saying, I need something. And so I think that this is a place that we're creating accessibility, and that's also approachable, because I think that there's going to be all kinds of different people that are looking for these medicines, and so how do we create a good way that they can onboard? And then the last thing I think is really meaningful to share is that you also want to create approachable in a way that it's like chocolate covered broccoli. It's like something that people want to do. They want to pull forward, not to push it away. So we have over 200 experiences that we've developed that really meet people in their also interests. You know, maybe going in outer space or Egyptian, or pairing it with breath work and other practices, so that this actually becomes a multimodal approach to wellness that also inspires us. Because if we leave inspired and have childlike wonder while we're doing these things, and that is one of my favorite parts of medicine, is seeing people coming back to that place. And especially with the work that we get to, you know, experience with Mosana and, you know, these veterans and first responders just saying, I just wanted to be a good boy or girl. And really coming back to this place of like, hi, Mr. Moon, and, you know, having that little bit of wonder, because I think healing is great, but we also need to be inspired in that process, because that's where true integration happens.
Thank you, Tim. We've had a beautiful history together, and you actually inspired us to come here to Colorado to establish what became Sana, because of being tip of the spear as far as being a veteran looking to blend standard allopathic and Western medicine and science with some of the entheogenic medicines and some of the indigenous wisdom, which has evolved into you pulling indigenous wisdom into this current framework. In your studies, now that you're working on your PsyD at DU, what do you see the intersection of utilization of entheogenic and psychedelics with Western allopathic modalities? What do you see, and then bringing in the indigenous cultures as well? How do you see that potentially progressing?
Well, that's a good question. I think before I get to that, I just want to go back to one thing you said at the beginning. What we're wired for, right? I talked about it a little bit this morning. One of the things that happens with the moral injury, as a matter of fact, the first thing that happens is we self-exile. And if there's one thing I've learned both through my own journey and helping guide others through their journeys, is we are wired for connection. We are wired to be part of a tribe. We are wired to see ourselves as part of a family unit, as far as part of a group that's bigger than us, but that we find our own identity in. With psychedelics, alternative, complementary healing modalities, one thing I found they all have in common that's different from the Western medical model is they're based on ceremony. And what is ceremony? In itself, what does actual ceremony mean? Whether you're going to church, whether you're going to sit with ayahuasca, whether you're going to sit in a sweat lodge. Ceremony is coming into community. It's coming into connection. As you ultimately walk your way back to the connection that really matters the most, and it's the hardest one to reestablish when it's broken, is the connection with self. And oftentimes the hero's journey is the descent down to the part that got disconnected in the trauma of the crisis, or the moments of doubt and questioning who and what we really are. And then you find someone who's been down there, who navigates that space and found ways in and out of it, and they take you down there so you can do your own work. I've seen that man do it in ceremony. I've done it a dozen times. I'm sure a lot of people in this room do it on a fairly regular basis, so you know what it looks like when somebody's sitting with themselves, maybe even for the first time, and the wall drops, and they see it, their own divinity, and they remember who and what they really are. And it's from that place that we do the one thing that the Western medical model will never get us to. There's no amount of medication, there's no amount of pharmaceutical options, there's no amount of therapy that's gonna get you there. Because it's only from that place, when you see yourself as you truly are, that you can forgive yourself for who you became in the journey through your own suffering. That's what psychedelics mean to me. That's what Sweat Lodge means to me. That's what connection means to me. That's what ceremony means to me. That's why I made it a big part of my life for about 5 years. So I just want to make sure I said that. But back to your question. How do I see them? How do I see these two worlds converging? And then when we think about the indigenous cultures who have basically walked with these torches through the darkness. I sit with a group of Native Americans who are incredible, and they tell this story all the time. There was a 100-year history in our country where just sitting in a sweat lodge could land you in jail. Could get your kids taken from you and put in a boarding school. They were persecuted just for praying to their God. But they held strong. They practiced in private. They found ways to worship their God and to bring their people into ceremony, even if it required them to break the law and do it in the shadows. The way I see these worlds converging, I think part of my mission, at least part of it anyway, is to bring soul back to science. That's why I tell the story that I do. It's why I can talk about the brain as easily as I can talk about my heart, how it got broken, and how I was able to see my soul for the first time through that brokenness. My research at VU is really centered around this. I think the missing component in the Western medical model is connection, authenticity. Like I said this morning, to sit with someone's shame and truly do something with it that is helpful and beneficial, you have to take off the hat of the scientist. Shame cannot be studied, it can only be felt. And the only way to feel it is to feel your own. And we are all capable. We have all experienced those kinds of injuries throughout our life. It doesn't require you to be a first responder or a veteran or anything like that. But that's what's missing. And that I feel like people in this room and all the people that you represent are doing. And it's an honor. It's an honor to be a part of it. It's an honor to have survived my own journey long enough to get to this point. That's where I see is the indigenous healing traditions that have never died, even though we try to kill them. They stayed strong, and the reason they stayed strong is because they are wired to the thing that's actually real in this world, and that is human connection. And we bring this into the Western medical model by being humble and realizing that just because we know the ones and zeros about science, and just because we can name all the areas of the brain, we kind of know what they do under an fMRI, all this kind of stuff, doesn't mean you know what you're talking about. It's being humble in the face of all of that, and accepting that there's another layer that's always been at play, and every single one of us feel it, even if you believe in science and nothing else. Sorry, that's my tangent.
No, don't be sorry. No, that was exactly what I was hoping would be shared. I got to ask a follow-on question. So in the Western clinical model, it's very preferred that the clinician may maintain distance, maintain a blank palate, versus what we're talking about with spiritual connection and lived experience and finding that connectivity. How do we reconcile those two from your mind?
And that's the danger. One of the reasons I'm in this program, one of the reasons I stepped out of the psychospiritual coaching, and I do believe Colorado is an incredible place, and there's incredible things that are gonna happen here. But some of the worst things will happen here too. Because one of the things that's missing is the code of ethics. Granted, the state is, through the facilitator training, they're trying to, embed that in how people learn how to hold psychedelic space. But the reality is, the biggest difference, the biggest glaring difference between the Western medical and the psychedelic assisted therapy healing is one has ethics, and one is usually going on gut intuition. And there's a lot of danger that can happen in that space. We protect clients in the therapy booth because there is a point where the intimacy cuts off. There is no boundary like that when you're holding psychedelic space. So you are at the mercy of someone who's serving that medicine, who may not have done all their healing. As a matter of fact, they might be serving that medicine because it's the bypass. It's I'm gonna tell the whole world about this phase of the journey. I love that part because it's like, yeah, but now you're ignoring the thing you came here to do, which is not everybody in the world, it's you. You heal this and the world gets it. You don't have to say a word, right? It's the difference in the ethics between the two. That, to me, is probably the biggest rub and why the Western medical model will win out when it comes to anything that has to do with any kind of legality of this. How do you blend them? I think you do what Colorado's doing now, which is you set up programs where people who want to come to this state, who want to, experience these medicines, have the ability to go to a healing center. You give them a choice. There's the unregulated market, which is the legal market, as my friend Mr. Matthews always tells me to call it. It's the legal market. It's not the unregulated market. And the medical, like kind of the healing center model. You have options. The market will get a vote. And there is a lot of great people serving medicine in the state that will never go through those training programs, and they don't have to. They shouldn't have to. But there's a lot more people who should go through those programs. And there's a lot of healing centers that are going to do really, really good things for people. But what they won't get, that we get in the illegal space, is the intimacy. Because they're going to have to abide by the same exact rules and regulations that you would have to abide by in a medical office. And as anybody here who's experienced psychedelics knows, this is an intimate experience. You learn to love yourself again because you learn to love someone else in the process of it. And that gives that person an incredible amount of power. And you have to trust that they're going to give it back to you and not take it.
So Michael, as someone who is of all the people that I've met, very few that are as curious, that truly embody ambivalent objective curiosity, and in exploring these new things to weave together. I consider you a master weaver of pulling things that maybe initially are dissociated, but somehow finding that connection for them to come together. What are some of the more exciting things that you've either seen or are playing with as far as this weaving of healing modalities?
Well, first, Tim brought up something that I just want to share. I have the privilege to sometimes be on a call with astronauts around this phenomenon called the overview effect. And it's when astronauts go into outer space and look back at the Earth, something shifts inside them. It actually, like, it's a documented thing that they see the world differently, and just by that perspective shift. And I think that's what this medicine and or these modalities include breath work and certain types of meditation that go really hand in hand as a palette for all of this. And so I just, it's a way to get curious and still be in, again, that inspiration side, because who didn't look up to astronauts when you grew up? I think that these are just really meaningful ways that we can tell stories that can get people curious. The other thing that just percolated from this, we're working with like the Ram Dass Foundation, and Ram Dass is such a great ally in non-dogmatic coming back to the heart. And I think we can create these non-ordinary states where we can actually give messaging that really speaks to that, oh my God, there I am again. And that's what, even like ketamine, it's a disassociative, so the mind can see the mind. And you can be like, oh my God, there I am. That's why we get so many moms, because 2 years into, having their little rugrats, they're like, I don't know me anymore. I don't know who I used to be. And now that's starting to affect how I show up. It's starting to affect I'm starting to lash out, or whatever that is. So I just think that these are really meaningful tools that, there's also good, better, best versions of it. There's a free app on the phone that uses the flashlight that can create these really beautiful states. There's also a wearable that, personal use that you can always have in your backpack, that I can be in nature and start to combine nature and technology to actually go deeper with nature. That to me is where I think we kind of started to say, oh my God, no tech at all. Well, one, kids love tech. So if you start to actually then create technology wellness that is approachable, that uses VR gaming and uses haptics and vibroacoustic therapy, wow. I mean, now you get your kid really doing self-regulation, and instead of trying to tap and do all these other things, that might just not be like in the flow of somebody. And the other thing I think is really interesting is when you start to approach things in a multimodal approach. So when the clients come into the Zen Den, their eyes are closed and we use a stroboscopic light, and it's basically doing something I would say is in the same river of EMDR. It's distracting that flight or fight system so things can be processed. But what I love that I think what we're able to provide is we don't need to go into the story. Because then when you're deploying that vibroacoustic therapy and you're distracting that flight or fight, you're able to get into the fascia. And if you've ever read the book, The Body Keeps a Score, or heard this phrase, issues are in the tissues, now you're actually clearing things out from the root. So we don't need to go into the story. We don't need to say, oh, that didn't happen. It's actually just the energy that's still stuck in there, and that's where we glitch. And I think we're really at a place that I'm seeing musicians, we're working with really beautiful people that are seeing how can my music, even though I'm selling out stadiums, how can I actually create more boutique offerings that can actually really lead to changing the lives of my audience. And that to me has such a ripple effect, because even just knowing about that creates a palette of curiosity that then somebody else is going to be like, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to go to that event, but I'm actually curious about this. And I think there's going to be more and more ways that this is disseminated through some pretty amazing conduit.
Thank you for your share. So for those that aren't aware, you're talking a little bit about stroboscopic, you're talking about haptics, you even talked about down-regulating beta and increasing alpha and beta. Can you share a little more about that? Because some of our audience may not be familiar with some of these alternative therapies and how they're enhancing, or how they can, so how do we take that and then blend it with EMDR and CBT or some of these other standard therapies to increase efficacy of those existing programs?
So the things that I'll share around the specific technologies of stroboscopic light and vibroacoustic therapy. So stroboscopic light works in this way that your eyes are closed, but the optic nerve is still picking up the frequency of the flickering light. So the brain does three things. One, it gets curious, and so it'll actually start to train into those different frequency states. So obviously that's really beautiful to start giving more ability and just awareness, like, oh, I do have a little bit of a joystick, and I can start to create that neuroplasticity and or awareness that I can do that even, so that then in other practices and modalities that can kick in. The second part is because you're not getting an image to the brain, it decides to come up with colors and patterns that are even outside of what the eye can see. It's at, just like your ear has a range of what it can hear, so does your eye, and this is your brain. I mean, so I would say that most clients of ours that have done medicine before will say, that's what I see with DMT, that's what I see with Aya. And that to me is just such a beautiful way to, again, create what we call IMAX for the soul. But then the vibroacoustic therapy, so if you've ever seen a deer or rabbit will shake after something happens, like an incident, like so, they get startled, they'll shake after and just let it move through. And I'm like, well, okay, great. And the Ayurveda and Kundalini will have you do the shaking and the moving. But I'm like, well, if we have technology that can do that at a much faster rate, and I can also be out of my head of what I'm doing and actually just let it wash through, that's where we're really starting to see where that type of vibroacoustic therapy, and these are also just conduits of frequency. And as Einstein and Tesla said, frequency is going to be the medicine of the future. And I think we're pretty much there. And we're just now starting to put the ancient practices and starting to say, oh, well, we've been kind of talking apples to apples. We just didn't know that for so long.
Tim, if we could go back to a little bit of your past and your story. Your first time sitting with psychedelics, having more of a rigid, you were a ranger interrogator, you grew up in the Nancy Reagan, just say no, we all, I think so many of us were held in those externally implemented guardrails or limitations, however you want to call it. Can you tell me a little bit about not so much the mental, emotional, or the physical, can you tell me a little bit about the spiritual experience that you had the first time you sat with medicine? And how did that drive what you're doing?
Yeah. So interestingly, I didn't start with plant medicines. I started with ketamine, and it was to break the suicidality. I had a moment in 2018 where if my little boy hadn't woken up when he did, I would not be here. And I struggled with the resonance of that experience all the way through to 2020. And just happened to be surfing Facebook and saw an ad for a ketamine clinic in Denver. And at that point it was either I'm gonna do something drastic or I'm gonna kill myself because I can't do this anymore. So for me, it was ketamine. And I had no idea what ketamine was. I'm like not gonna do drugs or anything. I'm like in that mindset, right? And I remember going down to this ketamine clinic and just telling them, like, I don't know what this is, I don't know what's gonna happen, but I saw the guy sitting in the picture and he's on a mountaintop and he just looks happy. And I'm like, I miss being happy. Like, is this what happens? Like, if I do this, am I gonna be sitting on a mountain smiling? Because I haven't smiled in I don't know how long. And they're like, well, we can try. And so I went through a max dose protocol for 6 sessions straight. And basically my whole thing was, just hit me with everything you have, because if you don't, I don't know if I'm coming back. So we started there. And for me, the disassociation, I had no concept of it, right? And as it's happening, I fought. Like literally, I was ripping things off the wall. They had to pin me down. Two people had to pin me down. One was a Special Forces PA, the other was a combat medic from Tikrit. I wouldn't let it in. I would not let go of control. I wasn't gonna do it. There was no God in there. There was no nothing. As a matter of fact, it felt like I was having surgery because it just had that smell and all the stuff. And I'm like, yeah, no, not me. But I kept going back because I was having these dreams that just kept telling me to go back. I didn't get a spiritual experience off ketamine. I got a very mechanical experience. And it was very much like a meat grinder for me. And after about 6 weeks after my last infusion, with no support, no coaching, no brackets, no nothing to hold me, it all came back. And it came back 10 times worse than it was. And it wasn't until I was oversharing in my graduate program that I was approached by a professor who ended up connecting me with a former student in the program I was in at Regis, who was a veteran and who was in the medicine world. And we talked, and he asked me if I would go sit with someone he knew who ended up being the person who saved my life. It was January of 2020. I did my first psilocybin journey. 8 grams.
Wow.
I don't know anything about math, so 8 grams didn't strike me as any significant thing. 12 hours. And I found it again. It was instant. Well, it wasn't instant because I still fought that shit for 3 hours, but then eventually broke through. And I went back home. And I felt this kid grew up Roman Catholic. And I thought I was looking for him, but what I ended up finding was her. She's a she. And she held me and just rocked me like a baby for hours and hours and made me forgive, like made me believe I deserved to be forgiven and that I deserved to be loved. I've never forgot that. It has become the experience that I have built a completely different world by which I live in now. And it was that experience that was then the gateway to the medicine that I allowed in, although I still fought her constantly. But that was the gateway to ayahuasca. And for 3 years, she cleaned out every last bit of it and put it at the bottom of the pail. I was an atheist. 6 combat deployments to Iraq, another 15 deployments in Special Operations World, doing stuff that I still can't believe I did. There was no God. And there was no way to get myself to believe that there was, because if there was a God, then that would mean there's something that could forgive me and I couldn't be forgiven. Every day, I feel her. She was just with me this morning. I was talking to Chad about it. I feel her now. She's resonating hard. I know she's there. I know she's watching me. And I know she's the one that knocks down every single barrier between me and what I'm sitting here to do. No matter how many times I lay in bed at night worrying about it, she always seems to fix the problem. I just gotta keep the faith, and I know what faith is this time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, brother.
Thank you for allowing such vulnerability and the testament of that which cannot be articulated in ones and zeros.
Yeah.
That connection with that is greater than us. That I believe is the component that's missing in a lot of the modalities. So not saying that those modalities aren't incredibly beneficial, because they are. However, I view it like a three-legged stool. One leg is the physical, physiological, one leg is the mental, emotional, psychological, and one leg is the spiritual / community. Spiritual connection with that is greater than us, so we'll call that our vertical connection if we're gonna put cardinal direction, and community is our lateral connection. And that's those that are in our orbit, it's not our HLA, it's those that we're connected with, that we're choosing to navigate this journey with. And so if any one of those legs is much shorter or not taken care of, it's pretty hard to balance on a one-legged or a two-legged stool. So thank you for bringing that so far forward in our discussion. Thank you, Tim. Well, if I could just take a couple of moments and we'll wrap this up. So we've heard so many beautiful perspectives, and when I've heard consistently and seen in this organization or in this gathering is a heart forwardness of everyone here, everyone truly wanting to step forward and help. And I would dare say most of it comes from places of wounding in our own hearts and turning our pain into purpose. I can tell you that was mine as well. And some other time we can. I'll be happy to share my story, but bringing it to where we are now. So you've heard folks talk about Mansana, which is something that my wife and I established as a place for people to come and find safety, love, and community, and inviting those that have their talents and their gifts to come into a collaboration, into a weaving, what we will call a multidisciplinary or multimodal approach, recognizing that time together is the treatment, retreatment, but then providing opportunity for there not only to be care afterwards, with a very robust integration program, but then also it being introduced into the larger community of like-minded people. So the community is what so many of us are seeking. It's what makes us human. And also there is no one individual path that's going to fix it for everybody. And there's a beautiful Hindu proverb that sounds really great in Sanskrit, but I don't speak Sanskrit. And essentially it says, there are many paths to the top of the mountain. The only one failing is the one running around the base of the mountain telling everyone else they're doing it wrong without climbing themselves. And so we talk about these different paths, and we also talk statistically, the likelihood of you being you is 1 in 700 trillion. And you being you is 1 in 700 trillion, and you being you is 1 in 700 trillion, all the way around the room. So by definition, you being you is a miracle. And then this collection, what is the likelihood that this would have happened this time together? And so that's where ceremony comes in. That's where the recognition of these beautiful occurrences in our life and us putting meaning to them, regardless of your particular belief tradition. So if we can capture that, and then also understanding that the framework in which we have to work, because at the end of the day, we've got to make sure our families are fed. We've got to make sure that the efforts that we've made to get licensure and things like that, so that we can work within the system. How do we create that connection, that blending? One of the approaches is what we are getting ready to launch. So Mansana is a nonprofit organization. It operates under RFRA, the Religious Freedom Rights Act. Also operates under Proposition 122, the decriminalization of natural medicines here in Colorado. That's part of why we came here. So that was step one of our journey to create this safe place of healing. And being a nonprofit, without an economic engine, we're reliant upon the tin can or the tin cup economic model, hoping that people will contribute.
And we realize that that's not always sustainable. Those that have worked in nonprofit recognize that there are ebbs and flows. And so we are in Q1 of 2026, we'll be launching the Heroes Journey Center. So the Heroes Journey Center is a for-profit. We will start off as an IOP with the residential component and then quickly move into a detox center with the residential component. So forward-facing, it will meet all of the requirements, all of the standards to make sure that payors will pay, that licensure is protected. There will be some of these modalities introduced because typical detox is glorified prison in many places and heavy pharmaceutical loads. So people walk in addicted to one medicine and then they walk out dependent upon another. We're not shifting the needle. We're just providing a short respite. And then, as we've heard from so many people, they're being thrust back into the exact same environment that created the pressure that led to these addictions or these survival patterns. So we will be introducing things like transcranial magnetic stimulation. We will be using ketamine not as the end state, but as a pattern interrupter. Ketamine's highly effective to interrupt patterns. It's not the best for sustained care for a lot of reasons we can talk about later. By utilizing that, utilizing fitness, utilizing community, utilizing sound therapy and vibroacoustic sound and stroboscopic light in nutrition, recognizing that food is medicine as well. So bringing those things in while still being fully compliant. And then parallel to that, we will have Mansana for those that want to explore the spiritual path of working with entheogenic medicines to catalyze their healing, so that in cooperation, those two entities can work together to provide a safe place for people to come, to find connection, to find healing, and then create a community where that can be sustained. Once upon a time, our medicine keepers in our tribes, because we were all indigenous once from wherever it is we came from, and back then there was a commonality. You had the tribal leader, and then you had the medicine keeper who was also the spiritual advisor, and both held equal regard within the tribe. Somewhere along the line, we split out the spiritual from the medical, and so being able to bring those back together, I believe, is imperative for us to, as one people, be able to heal. So bringing community back. When you didn't go to the medicine keeper of your tribe and then never see them again. It was all integrated as a part of community. And so we want to keep that back. And for those that hold medicine from various cultures, there was a time when medicine keepers could talk to each other. Even if tribes were in conflict, the medicine keepers could still communicate with each other because you didn't have those tribal limitations. We're hoping to be able to take step forwards to restore that back into our communities.